I think it is quite timely to be speaking about Palestine in the wake of the most recent assault on Gaza. Let's face it, the climate about discourse on Palestine in the United States is becoming narrower and narrower. It is not the place it used to be. Don't get me wrong. When I first came to this country in 1983, there were already limits and very narrow parameter of debate about Palestine. But there is no question over the last several decades I've been here, I have noticed that there has been a deliberate campaign of intimidation and the imposition of limitations on speech on Palestine on purpose on college campuses, in public fora, in Washington, D.C., and of course, always at the US Congress. When I first, I was talking over lunch with friends. When I first came to America in the 1980s, for example, it was customary that the congressional delegation from Texas used to comprise a number of outspoken critics of Israel. This was in the 1980s. The senator from the state, like Senator John Tower, were some of them advocates against Israel. Don't get me wrong. These were not progressives who identified with the struggle of the Palestinians. Many of them were tied to oil companies and the arms industry, and those corporations are close to Gulf regimes. Gulf regimes at that point were advocating for different reasons against Israel, for clashes about arms imports and so on. But it was a different landscape. What happened in the last several decades since I came, there has been a convergence of two forces that are antithetical to our freedom of speech about Palestine. On the one hand, you have the traditional American liberal fascination with Israel, which has remained unchanged, but at two different levels, however. There is a dichotomy about American liberalism and Zionism. The American liberal Congress has remained unchanged. All American liberals in Congress, witness the statements of Elizabeth Warren about Gaza recently, or Senator Sanders, the only socialist, the only atheist in the US Senate. And you would see that there is no difference between the far left and the far right on this issue. They disagree on anything else, but not on this issue. But the traditional American liberal base has changed. Since the 1980s, when I first came to this country, the bedrock of American support for Israel resided among American liberal Democrats in the big cities on both coasts and the Midwest. Since then, this group has become most distant from Israel. Witness the recent polls about Israel in the last war on Gaza. We find that American liberals are the least likely to support or identify with Israel among all groups. Now that is change. But parallel to that, there is another change in the service of Israel among the Republican. The bedrock of American support for Israel no more resides with American liberals. It is now with Southern Baptists. As a result, the entire landscape, not only of the South, deep and superficial South, but also of the country in general, of the Republican Party, has shifted to an advocacy not only of Zionism, but in the most militant, fascistic strands of Zionism. We are talking about a Republican Party that is to the right of the government of Netanyahu. But that's also true about American liberalism. Notice when it comes to Israel, they disregard their own ideological orientations, so that somebody like Alan Dershowitz can be to the right of Benjamin Netanyahu, as far right as Netanyahu is, of course. So there is something going on, without a doubt, about the climate on which discourse is taking place. So there has been these changes, and yet, and this is the paradox, as much as it has become unsafe, unpopular, and even economically harmful to speak on the issue of Palestine, regardless what your job is, academia or non-academia, it is incumbent, it's more imperative than ever that we are obligated to speak about Palestine. It is not a safe issue here in the United States, and it is not safe also over which there is an artificial consensus that is imposed. The artificial consensus of the US Congress is now want to extend itself over every area of public life in this country. They want to make all of us academics as one voices as they are in the US Congress. But those people are beholden to special interests and PACs. They have their own corrupt agendas. In what way, in what name should we academics be beholden to special interests unless we are being intimidated by issue of fear of being branded? But it seems to me, if you are somebody who has never been associated with any bigotry in your discourse or rhetoric, there's nothing you should fear. But there is that climate. I will tell you a story about somebody I know who teaches at a major so-called elite universities, even though I hate that terminology. And since she got her job, she hasn't been outspoken about Palestine whatsoever. So I sent her a message with her sister, who I knew from Berkeley, saying that, I really am wondering, is there a time going to be when you will decide to speak out on Palestine? And she sent me back the message saying that she will, but she's waiting to get tenure at that university. And I sent her a message with her sister. Message to her was, and I sent it to her directly later, you will never speak out. If you condition yourself that you will make your expression of your views conditional on economic material settings, you will condition yourself to be silent throughout. You will get tenure and then you will say, I want to move from this university to Harvard. I want to apply for a grant at Ford Foundation. I want to get this particular prestigious honor at this organization. And as a result, you internalize the message of intimidation. So it seems to me there is more an obligation. There's another reason why there is more of an obligation to speak about Palestine since I came to this country. In 1960s and 70s and 80s, maybe until 1982, there was a Palestinian organization called Palestine Liberation Organization. It advocated around the world on behalf of the Palestinian people. It spoke about their grievances and their suffering. And it invested in many societies to bring up that issue to the world, the attention of people around the world. That organization is no more. It has been co-opted by the American-Israeli alliance. That clique in Ramallah is nothing but a collaborationist, accommodationist arm of the Israeli occupation. They have emptied the PLO of all its meaning. I don't care if somebody like Hanan Ashrawi still speak on behalf of that so-called PLO. It doesn't exist. The Palestinian people know it doesn't exist. It has been corrupted. Its own charter has been amended by Bill Clinton, certainly no friend of the Palestinian people. It is because the organization that spoke for Palestine doesn't exist anymore. It hasn't been allowed to exist. It is incumbent on us, those who can, to speak on behalf of the Palestinian people. I should also say the question of Palestine is more than Palestine. I mean, it is for this reason that many of you who are active on Palestine come from different background, ethnic, racial, ideological even, and political and national. It is an issue that has so many intersecting symbolism embedded in it. It is about Western hegemony and intervention. It is about the redrawing of the map of the Middle East after the First World War. It is about colonial powers who do not want to get the message that the issue of self-determination has been settled more than a century ago. But it is also about the longest occupation, an occupation that continues to go on with the full support by this government. So when people say we are picking on the issue of Israel to the detriment of other issues, I mean, that is also factually incorrect. Most of the people I know who are active on Palestine, we are also active on issues of injustice worldwide, and we speak about those issues. But there is nothing wrong about specializing. Some of you may specialize in issues of Kashmir or on Palestine or on Kurds or on many issues where people are oppressed. But the Palestinian issue doesn't have an establishment voice nowhere, especially after the PLO has been co-opted by the Israeli occupation authorities. The symbolism is also about Arab regional order. It is no more that there is now an alliance between Israel and the United States and Western powers. We are talking about an Arab regional order that is in cahoots with the Israeli occupation. The Saudi alliance with Israel is no more a secret. It's not only Saudi Arabia. It's Saudi Arabia, it's Qatar, it's Egypt. It's also the Syrian government, which has not done anything against Israel or tried to liberate its own Golan Heights. It's about all these governments. It's also about some corrupt opposition movements who also have been co-opted by the Israelis. And that includes elements of the political establishment in Lebanon, elements of the exiled political opposition in Syria, as well as various establishment voices in the Arab world. There is a US investment in Israel. The United States has accorded more than $100 billion to Israel since 1967. This is an American project, remains an American project. So it's certainly true that those of us who live in this country should be speaking the loudest than any country in the world on this subject, especially that the United States now has become in a minority opinion on the issue of Palestine. I mean, if you look at public opinion around the world, as I've been following it since 1960s, you see a great shift. When I was growing up, the biggest supporters of Israel were in Scandinavian countries, Germany, and Europe, Western Europe. That is no more the case. That is no more the case. If you want to see the shifts in public opinion about Palestine, look at the statements of the Swedish government today. A guy who was participant in the ship that went to Gaza is now a minister in Sweden. There's a new government that wants to recognize the Palestinian state. But also look at the worldwide. This is the General Assembly vote every year in September at the United Nations. Every year there's a vote on Palestine, and every year there's a tally of international votes. Look at the votes. Judge for yourself. Usually, that's the outcome of the vote. There is the entire world on the side of the Palestinians, the entire world, and then there is in the middle some Western European countries that are intimidated by the United States, so they decide to abstain. And then there is supporters of Israel. Who are they? The United States and Israel. Yeah, Israel is a big supporter of Israel, by the way. The United States and Israel, the Marshall Islands, and Micronesia. Last year, Canada joined in, so they were 5. This tells you that international public opinion, as measured by regular surveys, have indicated a tremendous shift in favor of the Palestinian. The majority of world opinion is now on the side of the Palestinian people, by far. It varies from one country to another. Like there's more support for Palestinians in France than in Germany, but even in Germany, not by a huge margin, 6, 7, 8%, but that was not the way it was in the 60s and 70s. Let me now speak about what I think are the roots of the conflict. There is no consensus among historians, political scientists, and experts on how far back in history do we go in order to trace the origins of this intractable conflict. People disagree. Jimmy Carter wrote a book, which I recommend to no one. In fact, he wrote 3 books on the Middle East, and of which I recommend none. And in that book called The Blood of Abraham, he speaks about going back to the Bible times, and that's where the origins were. That's not where it started. This is an utterly modern conflict. It is a conflict that was born in the late 19th, early 20th century. It represented the clash of modern ideas of nationalism between Zionism and Palestinian and Arab nationalism. That's the origins of the conflict. But we would be foolish or insensitive if we do not begin, as I do, with anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is the origin of this conflict. It is the Christian Europe and the church which had cuddled, sponsored, embraced, and spread the menace of anti-Semitism throughout the ages that is responsible for this climate of hate. And as you know the story of anti-Semitism in Europe, after the assassination of Tsar Alexander II and his replacement by the Third, and the Dreyfus affair in France in the 1890s, there was a climate of anti-Semitism. Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, heard from his window people in the land of the French Revolution chanting death to the Jews. So certainly there was an evil of anti-Semitism. As a result, the Jewish people in Europe lost hope in Haskalah movement, in the movement that basically pinned all the hope for emancipation and equality on the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was no more the savior. That's when the ideas of anti-Semitism began. It is about finding, and it is, to come up with an idea in order to find a haven for Jewish people suffering from anti-Semitism, pogroms, is not in itself a bad project if it does not take place at the expense of another indigenous people. It's like Maxime Rodinson said, I am not necessarily against a Jewish state if it want to take its place on the moon. He was being facetious, but the point is, if it does not displace another already existing population. When Theodor Herzl came out with his book, Der Judenstaat, and I'm deliberately quoting the German title for an obvious reason. He wrote this book called Der Judenstaat, and yet, you go to your library, you will find it as the Jewish state. That is a mistranslation of the title of the book. That's a deliberate mistranslation. It should be from German, the state of the Jews. The difference is obvious. Theodor Herzl wanted to find a state for the Jewish people. He didn't care where it was. In fact, the chapter about the topic of destination or location is titled Argentina or Palestine. He contemplated East Africa and Uganda. There were many topics entertained. However, East European Jews who were more religious, before they attended the first Zionist conference in 1897, so the book was in 1896, the first Zionist Congress was in 1897. A year later, it was then that it was settled it to be in Palestine. And at that point, they were clear about what they wanted to do. Read the first aim of the Zionist Congress. They said the aim is the colonization. That word was not an impolite word among Europeans of all religions who believed in white supremacy. And the Zionists were part of that climate. They did not think that this is a dirty word. They spoke about its colonization. And they wanted the colonization of Palestine. Of Palestine. They would disguise it in document as in Palestine, but they meant the conversion of Palestine into a Jewish state. Now, some people believe that the problem was that those early founders did not know that there was an already existing native population there. It's the reverse. The problem is they knew too well and they didn't care. That is the utter callousness of the Zionist project, is that it was intended to be a violent project. This is not an aberration in the history of the conflict. This conflict was set in motion as a very bloody conflict by virtue of the Zionist plan from the beginning. Theodor Herzl was asked about the native population. There are still some awful biographies that said that Theodor Herzl did not know about the native. He knew, of course he knew. In his book, which he published 2 years before his death, Alt Neuland, he spoke about Palestinians. Of course, he pretended that in the future they will be in peace with Israel, which of course he was wrong about. But Theodor Herzl was asked about that, and when they were asking about the Palestinians, he would cite to them the French proverb, qui veut la fin veut les moyens. The end, who desires the means desires the ends. They were very clear about how that's going to be done. He said, we're going to push them into the desert. These were articulated. I mean, what is very ironic when I first came to this country to discover that the Zionist lobby and organizations were able to concoct, literally concoct, a statement that an Arab official, the head of the PLO, in 1967, threatened to throw the Jews into the sea. He never said that. The head of the PLO, Ahmad Shukhairi, I mean, I read all his books. He was asked about this many times. Nobody has ever been able to produce that. That is a lie. Just as Zionist organizations today make up quotations and they attribute them to Hassan Nasrallah, and they get away with it. I mean, what am I talking about? They make stuff up, attribute them to me. I mean, they cannot make up stuff that would be incentive to the Jewish people because they know where I stand, and I've been outspoken against anti-Semitism in Arabic and English, but they make up other stuff. Now there's a campaign against BDS. Every time you read an article about BDS, they will say that I said that the aim of BDS is the elimination of Zionism in Palestine and the liberation of all of Palestine. I never said that. I wish that was true. What I actually say, and I will say it tonight, and I say it everywhere I speak, and I first said it on my speaking tour of British universities a few years ago, is that the true aim of BDS should be the non-existence of a racist, unjust Jewish state in Palestine. That we should have no Muslim state, Christian state, or Jewish state. We should have a state that is for all, with the full restoration of the rights of the Palestinian and the liberation of all of Palestine and the fulfillment of justice requirement for the Palestinian question. And yet they make it that I am branding BDS as such. It isn't. I wish it is. It isn't. So that's an example of what I know firsthand, the ease in which they make up quotations, lines, and lies, and fabrications. So they made up a statement attributed to the head of the PLO in 1967, and he never said it. Nobody produced an evidence that he ever said it. And yet, if you read the official Air Force order for the war in 1967, it contained the sentence, "We want to push them into the desert." It's amazing how the hateful language of Israel and Zionists is being attributed to the enemy. This is one of the many tricks of Zionism, by the way. Their own racism, they invert it and they attribute them to the other side. So I argue that from the very beginning, the Zionist project intended to be a violent one because they knew too well that the Palestinians didn't want that. Look, there's a book by Rashid Khaldi about the crystallization of Palestinian nationalism, but the manifestation of Palestinian rejection to Zionism were very early on. I was reading a book on the plane about that subject. Go back to 1919, the King Crane Commission. For those of you who may know, the King Crane Commission went there to investigate the aspiration and the demands of the people of the area. And the Palestinians were unequivocal. They wanted their own independence. And in the Syrian Congress of 1919, same year, the Palestinian delegation made it very clear that they want their liberation, and they have become suspicious about the Zionist project. In the first wave of Zionist immigration to Palestine, the Palestinians were welcoming, by the way. They were welcoming. They, in fact, were kind to the new settlers. Initially, they thought they were mere tourists, and they treated them accordingly. But they quickly found otherwise. How did the Palestinians treat those natives? Don't take my word for this. Read what a Zionist leader, Ahad Ha'am, wrote when he went to Palestine in the late 1890s and wrote articles about it. He said, "We treat them like animals. We hit them for no reason. We think they are dumb." And this has been a staple in Zionist propaganda ever since. There is an assumption that the Arabs are dumb and we can simply manipulate them. And when the Arabs are not manipulate them, they find excuses. They say, well, they are all agents of communism. Communism is no more in vogue. They are agents of terrorism. And look at the various illogical methods of association they play. Have you read the speech by Netanyahu at the United Nations? I mean, I couldn't stomach watching it, so I had to read the transcript itself. He basically associated what cannot be associated. Hamas, with Iran, Hezbollah, and ISIS. I mean, that's how they operate. After the Second World War, they said the Palestinians are Nazis. And then when the enemy is no more Nazi, they said the enemy is communist. I mean, that's how it was. And now the enemy is ISIS or Al-Qaeda. It has been going on in all my lifetime. And in the name of fighting those enemies, Israel gives itself the license to launch wars and bomb at will. In my own lifetime, I am 54 years old. In my own lifetime, Israel has bombed Tunisia, Sudan, Egypt, Jordan, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, not counting covert operations worldwide, and not counting assassinations of civilians, not counting the gunning down of a Moroccan waiter in Norway in 1974 because he dared to resemble a Palestinian leader. I mean, and in 1973, they downed a Libyan civilian airliner. That is the record of Zionism. That's the record of Israel. So it is because they knew there was a native population, violence became not a tool, but a necessary element of this project. Because they knew too well the Palestinians will not take it standing down. That they will be fighting, and fighting they have been doing unendingly. And this is the irony about Zionist leaders, is that for a movement that is rooted in nationalism, it never countenanced the possibility that a rival national movement can develop among the enemy population. It is because they thought so low of this enemy population. And they came to Palestine not with the intention to spread the wealth or to share prosperity, with the intention of starving them and driving them away. I mean, the gall today, the chutzpah, that Zionists complain about peaceful methods of resistance like BDS, when the Zionists were the first to introduce boycotts into the region. I mean, just as they were the first to introduce terrorism into the Middle East. The Zionists came to Palestine and they imposed boycott on Arab businesses. They called it a name. It's called Hebrew labor. Palestinians were not allowed to work in Jewish-owned enterprises. And the Jews were instructed not to patronize Palestinian Arab businesses. That was their intention. They want to starve them and push them away. Look at the record of how many Palestinian families have been deliberately pushed away from Palestine since 1967. And America is an accomplice in this, by the way. Notice how unusually generous American immigration policies are with Palestinians from Palestine as opposed to Arabs from other countries. I mean, there is no question about it. It is a conspiracy. And it is part of the Zionist plan to drive the people away. But they won't go away. And they procreate. If the Israelis would do something about it, they would have done. They would have done something about that. And the movement was, in its inception, based on the notion that those people are too weak to match us. And this is why Israel today is extremely obsessed with Hezbollah and with Iran, because they are developing such military intelligence skills, the likes of which Arab governments never presented against Israel. And this is what's frustrating Israel, because they thought so low of the enemy. The fact that Hezbollah can, or Hamas in Gaza, can outmatch them, outsmart them, is something that frustrates a people who believe genuinely in their own superiority vis-a-vis a native population that from the very inception they considered compared to animals. David Ben-Gurion talked, he said, these were like children. That was his impression of Arabs. And when the Zionists were selling the project to the European, they didn't like tame their language. They said, we want to extend the reach of Western colonialism into those areas. Chaim Weizmann said, we want an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. That's their language. That's the kind of language they use. And then you speak in the 1930s about the rise of another trend in Zionism, and I mean revisionist Zionism, of Vladimir Jabotinsky, the godfather of the current Israeli government in power, not only of Likud, but also of Kadima. Those groups they owe their allegiance to Jabotinsky. What is Jabotinsky's difference? Jabotinsky's definition of nation was based on race. He said, I mean, the fact that he was influenced by Italian nationalism, fascism, was not hidden. He said that a true nation is best defined by its racial recipe. Racial recipe. And they thought that the racial recipe of the native is inferior to the native recipe of the superiors. And he also was a big fan of parades and uniforms and marches and so on. I mean, there is no much distinction between the influences of Italian fascism and revisionist Zionism. And what was the recipe that he suggested in dealing with the Arabs? An iron wall. An iron wall to protect the Jewish state from the inhabitants and the owners of the land. They knew the land was not going to be taken peacefully. Look at the record of how much all the talk about purchasing land and so on. The land was stolen. You know that. The people were pushed away. You know that. They say they established a democracy. They established a democracy only when they calibrated the demographic balance to their liking by force, by killing enough, expelling enough, so that the Palestinians who reside inside Israel, who were put under military rule until 1967 and beyond, who had to have a special permit to move from one village to another village, whose poets were harassed and arrested, Mahmoud Darwish, Samih Qasim, Tawfiq Ziyad, all their poets. That's what Israel is. And you have now propagandists for Israel parading around college campuses saying that Israel is a democracy. I mean, when the Palestinians vote for somebody Israel doesn't like, they put them in jail or they kick them out of the country, as they did, as they have done. That's the record of Israel. This is a state that put poets in jail for writing poetry about Palestine. And they want to speak to you about freedom of speech that Israel accords to the Palestinians. But look what's happening. No matter of what they're doing, they are bringing Russian Jews into Israel to increase the demographic weight, because that's the language they speak. They speak about the danger of a demographic bomb. The Palestinians are not called Palestinians. They were never called Palestinians in Zionist documents. They were always called other names. It's like Simone de Beauvoir. She said the woman is not a woman. She is not the man. That's how the Palestinians are defined by Zionists. It's not that they are Zionists. They are non-Jews. How did the Balfour Declaration refer to Palestinians? It said, and I'm quoting, "It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done that prejudice the civil and religious," notice only civil and religious, not political rights, civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Can you imagine? The majority population, you want to ask me, what was their number at the time? 91%. 91% were called non-Jewish communities in Palestine. I mean, how glaring is that, right? The majority are not called what they are. They are called by what they are not. The term of reference was the Jewish population. That's why Balfour was asked, how could you promulgate this proclamation when the Palestinians are the majority? And he answered them very much in line with Zionist discourse. He said, you have to understand, numerical self-determination was excluded. Numerical self-determination was excluded. And that's Lord Balfour. And that's Lord Balfour, who himself was an anti-Semite. Himself was an anti-Semite. What were the Palestinians called in United Nations Resolution 242? They were called a just settlement of the refugee problem. That's the Palestinian refugee problem. No name for them. No name. Whenever they called them names, it's a terrorist. One time I went to a talk at a college I was teaching at, in Colorado College. And they had invited Amos Oz, what is called an Israeli liberal. I mean, the difference between an Israeli liberal, to me, and an Israeli right-winger is the amount of Palestinian children they would like to have killed per day. I mean, that's the difference. I mean, if a right-winger accepts 200 children, an Israeli liberal would want no more than 100, 150 per day. Otherwise, they would sign a petition saying, the killing of the children is bad, not for the Palestinian. It's bad for the soul of Israel. That's their language. You read the racist language. So I sat in frustration, listening to Amos Oz, watching all these liberal colleagues of mine in the audience applauding him. And he spoke about the Palestinians, when he was done. And he dared, during his talk, to say, he always bring up anti-Semitism and Zionism and Nazism and so on. And he said, when a society is being corrupted, and he takes these poses, to try to appear feigning moralism and so on. He said, when it abuses language, that's when the society is corrupt, when it abuses language. So I sat there listening to him for an hour and a half. After he was done, I stood up and I told the audience, I said, look, measure him by his own criteria, the abuse of language. How many times this man in front of you today abused language by referring to the Palestinians as terrorists? And how many times he compared the Palestinian national movement to the Nazi movement? That's the characteristic. That's the characteristic. Since I don't have my time, and I have so much more I wanted to say, which I didn't get into because of my exuberance, I want to say something about anti-Semitism. I think we should be very clear on the subject because it's being thrown in our faces, and I throw it back. I think, as an advocate for Palestinians, as militant as I am about that, we should be equally, from the standpoint of justice, dismiss from our ranks any voices of anti-Semitism or anybody who flirts with anti-Semitism. I don't care if they are Israelis who infiltrate our movement or whoever. People like Israel Shamir or anybody else. I think that the Palestinian movement is too precious, too just, to allow voices of anti-Semitism to creep in. Having said that, we should be very clear about this. Don't be shy. You can be as militant about Palestine as I am, and yet totally categorically against any forms of anti-Semitism whatsoever, rejecting it wherever it rears its ugly head. On the other hand, there are people in the Zionist movement who are anti-Semites, like Harry Truman, like FDR, like Lord Balfour, like the Christian right in the United States. I mean, those people who believe that we need to support Israel because then at the end of time, 2/3 of them will convert and then the others will be exterminated. That's not a rosy scenario for Jewish people, So in other words, you can be Zionist and be anti-Semitic. And you can be pro-Palestinian militant, but being totally against anti-Semitism. This doesn't mean, don't misquote me, I am not saying there are people who support Israel who are not anti-Semite. They exist. And of course, I disagree with them. But I am also saying there are some people in our movement who bring anti-Jewish voices, and we should categorically reject it. This cause is too precious, and the struggle has gone for too long, and it is for that the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish said, for this glorious struggle of the Palestinian people, at least they deserve a state. They certainly deserve more. Thank you very much.
What are the main things going on right now that we don't know about?
Well, I'll tick them off. One, I can only give you headlines. I write on these things in English on a website, Al Akhbar English, if you're interested, and on my blog daily. But in sum, one, there is a strong alliance between Saudi Arabia and Israel. These are the two worst regimes in the entire Middle East region, and the damage they do and they are doing cannot be measured. And this is something that all Americans should be aware of. Saudi Arabia is the most oppressive state of women and minorities of any country in the entire world, and of majorities. They managed to oppress majority and minorities as well. Two, Syrian rebel movement has been dominated by Islamists from the very beginning, despite the totally misguided romanticization of these rebels in American media, especially among liberals and some Trotskyists and some conservatives and others. So this is something that people like me who oppose the rebels from the beginning, as much as we also oppose the Syrian regime, have been pointing attention to. 3, ISIS did not develop from a vacuum. It didn't come from nowhere. Joe Biden can say all he wants. He singled out United Arab Emirates and Qatar and Turkey. There's a major omission. He failed to mention Saudi Arabia, a major power that in the name of trying to get rid of Bashar al-Assad by any means necessary, they showered so much money and weapons on these rebels, but make no mistake about it. The New York Times in 2012 said that very categorically. Saudi Arabia and Qatar took permission from the United States before they sent weapons to any of the rebels in Syria. So the other omission is he failed to mention United States. 4, I think there's something that's very important that you don't see in America, which is there is another Arab world. I mean, I hate to say this, but there are feminists in the Arab world. There are atheists in the Arab world. There are leftists in the Arab world. There are anarchists in the Arab world. I mean, I was with a group of anarchists when I was in college in Beirut, you know. You don't hear anything about that in the United States. There are so many interesting movements and organizations. There are revolutionary socialists in Egypt and so on. But there is a stereotype of the Arab world. It's all reduced to the question of religion. 5, the dominant discourse of religion and of Islamism is being challenged daily by brave people all around the region, including in Saudi Arabia, you'd be surprised. People are challenging the dominant discourse. And it seems to me this is why I think when we look at the Arab uprising era, I hate people who call it the Arab Spring, so please don't in my presence, is that we entered a revolutionary era, you know? And this will take a long time to see and even to digest. You know the famous exchange between Henry Kissinger and Zhou Enlai in China in 1970-71, when Henry Kissinger asked Zhou Enlai, the prime minister at the time, what's the Chinese communist view of the French Revolution? And Zhou Enlai famously told him, well, it's too early to tell, too early to tell. And for the era of Arab uprising, we just entered it. And I think that revolutionary changes are going to be coming in the future. I don't know when, but I am still very optimistic, as I remain optimistic about the demise of Zionism. Zionism has absolutely no permanent eternal shelf life. It just can't. I was asked whether I can identify 3 promising Palestinian leaders. I can easily first identify the non-promising one. It's the ones you see on TV. They are extremely unpromising, and they are becoming more unpromising as we speak. I think what I find very optimistic about Palestinians is that the alternative Palestinian leadership is not going to be the savior. It's not going to be like the autocrat, Yasser Arafat, of whom I'm not a fan, never was a fan. It's not going to be like the collaborationist clique in Ramallah or any of these people. It's going to be more grassroots, more civic associations, and more collective leadership style. They are not going to be people who are seeking the limelight or going to be on CNN or 60 Minutes. I mean, look what's happening during the Gaza war in Palestine 1948. I've been in touch with many of these groups. Extremely brave people. And how much they are persecuted and prosecuted. Are you aware during the Gaza war, the Israeli government went and looked what people wrote on Facebook, and some people lost their jobs because of what they wrote about Palestinians on Facebook? This is about Israel, that we are called the only democracy in the Middle East. Of course, the only true democracy in the Middle East is Cyprus, but that's another story. I think the alternative Palestinian leaders, the promising ones, are people without famous names, and they don't have fancy bank accounts, and they are not at famous dinner parties in London or in Paris. These are the ones I hope for. He asked me about Jimmy Carter, and I wish he didn't, because I'm now in a bad mood. I mean, first of all, Jimmy Carter's legacy is a permanently poisonous legacy. Jimmy Carter is the man who established the Camp David regime dictatorship of Egypt. He's responsible. This is a man who said the man who inspired him most in his life is Anwar Sadat. Anwar Sadat is an unrepentant, anti-Semitic Nazi. He's a Nazi. He's always wrote against Jewish people. He decided, I mean, some anti-Semites can make deals with Zionists. They did during the Second World War. Some Nazis made deals with Zionists for the flight of Jews from Europe. You see? I mean, some Zionists in Congress who are anti-Semites make deals with Israel. So Anwar Sadat was the product of an American policy that sought to split the Palestinian issue from Arab-Israeli issue. That's his legacy. I mean, what is else to praise about Jimmy Carter? This is like when American diplomats retire, and when they reach 75 or 80 usually, they issue an article in which they say they criticize American foreign policy to Israel. I mean, what benefit do they do? What benefit? When this man had power and clout, not only he didn't do anything, he did the utmost to serve the cause of Israeli occupation and its extension. And he also helped Israel by splitting. I mean, if you want to forget about the Palestinian, what about what he did to Egypt? The Egyptian people have been suffering from a dictatorship that was installed by Jimmy Carter's order. That's the legacy of Jimmy Carter. He may now make pronouncements on the Palestinians, but what is their value? What is their value? When he had the power, he didn't act. Now that he's powerless, he issues statements and then he backtracks on them. Like this book he wrote about Israel apartheid and so on. He backtracks on that. He said, well, I was meaning the West Bank, and I did not mean to say in Israel proper. Well, the apartheid is in both. I mean, by the admission of many in Israel, there is a double system, political system in Israel at every level. If Andrew Hacker wrote a book about two nations, about America, black and white, there have been two nations since the founding of this state. One for the Arabs, inferior, denigrated, and totally disregarded in funding and everything else, has its own set of laws. Lands can be stolen. I mean, this is a state that not only stole the Palestinian lands, it passed a law to make it impossible for Palestinians to sue the state that stole its lands. I mean, that's Israel. So, and Jimmy Carter does not see the parallels with apartheid? Well, I'll tell you what. Before the occupation of 1967, Israel and South Africa, apartheid South Africa, had a very strong alliance. So South Africans were able to see the parallels. Jimmy Carter still can't. As you know, the issue of nuclear weapons by Israel is not theoretical. In 1973, Israel did consider the use of nuclear weapons on its enemies. I mean, this has always been an option. And this is an issue that, of course, rankles a lot of Arabs and Muslims. I mean, the West is telling us that we need to feel safe because Israel has nuclear weapons, because nuclear weapons are safe in the hands of Jews but not in the hands of Muslims. I mean, imagine that selling to Muslims. Imagine selling that arguments to Muslims, which is what America sells us every day about nuclear weapons, that Iran can't have it, Pakistan shouldn't have it, but Israel should. Why? Because it's a peaceful state, I guess, and doesn't resort to war and doesn't invade and doesn't bomb. I mean, that's their logic, as hilarious as we find it. And why is that? Because I think it has always been an option, always remains an option. And if you ask me, and I've said that before, if Israel were to deploy nuclear weapons and drop bombs on Arabs, the United States Congress, and even public opinion, I hate to say that, despite all the Americans I love who feel for the Palestinians, many of you sit in the audience and so on, but the majority of public opinion would stand with Israel. They would make justifications, I have no doubt. I'm sure they will say, well, the enemy are terrorists, all of them. Well, they are hiding behind the, I mean, we know their discourse, we know their trickery. Right, you're absolutely right about, I mean, Israelis are saying that, in fact, that many of them, in fact, John Kerry said that. I mean, the friends of Israel, I mean, nobody's more friendly to Israel than any American Secretary of State, you know, maybe except James Baker. He said that there's no desire to look into the future to see as the progress of where the outcome is going to be for Israel and for the people on the land. I mean, look, I'm somebody who wants to continue Jewish existence in all of the Middle East. I am somebody in favor of return and compensate all Jews who are Arabs who in any way were unfairly driven out of their homes from any Arab country. Even though, of course, the Israeli Mossad was a participant in driving Jews from Arab land through sabotage and fear and intimidation and terrorism. Operation Babylon in Iraq is one example. And also, I never bought there was an Israeli peace camp, but at least now we see it in full view. There is no Israeli peace camp. There never was. There was a camp that was worried about the occupation and what it does to the soul of Israel, the anguish of the Israeli soldiers. It was never about the Palestinians. It was never about the victims. It was about what this occupation does to the victimizers. That's their angle. That's their angle. The non-Jews, as they would refer to them, those never mattered and never will in their plan of the future. Having said that, the fact that they are totally wrong-headed and all that, it doesn't bother me in the least. If anything, I would tell you straight, I am glad that the Israelis did not reach a deal with Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat would have dangerously been the one person who would have imposed the two-state non-solution on the Palestinians. So in that way, the short-sightedness is in the favor of the inevitable, having the one state where the full right of the Palestinian refugees and all Palestinians will be restored. But there is no Israeli peace camp. I thought the Labour Party in Israel is dead, by the way, like literally. Until yesterday, I read that the head of the Labour Party, the name of whom cannot be identified by anybody in the audience, I'm sure. The head of that party spoke, and the head of the party said that they are very upset about what the Swedish government are doing, but that they are friends with the Swedish left of center party, and they will do their best to convince them not to recognize Palestine. That's a peace camp. That's a peace camp. So, if that's a peace camp, what's the difference with the war camp? Well, here we are bound by the laws, and as a result, BDS is all what we can do. And BDS is, thus far, within the laws of the United States. Because, when I'm mentioning the law is because you know how it is. I tell people now in the Palestinian movement, you have to be careful about your charity. Before you give money to a Palestinian charity, I have to go and make sure that it's within American law. I was telling people over lunch, sometimes I do work as a consultant for law firms when Arabs are accused of a variety of things, and Arabs are always accused of a variety of things, political things and so on. And one time there was a case, a guy in Chicago gave money to a hospital in Gaza. Do you know the US government took him to court because they said the Gaza hospital was controlled by Hamas, and as a result he contributed to a terrorist organization. The US government prosecuted that person. So what is needed here is more courage and more support for BDS throughout. In the Middle East, it's a different struggle. I tell Palestinians all the time, I said, BDS is not intended for Palestinian, damn it. It's the minimum Palestinian can do. I believe that the Zionist project has been a violent project throughout, and that the Palestinians should reserve the right to resist by any means necessary, political, civil, violent, non-violent, so on, by any means necessary against this violent Zionist project. And I will tell you this, the Palestinians really tried all methods. They tried peaceful struggle. From 1948 until 1960s, Palestinians did what they are being told to do right now. Why don't you try peaceful non-struggle? They did. They tried that. And what did Palestinians do? What did the Israelis do? They killed them. Are you aware in the 1950s alone, many Palestinians from Lebanon and Jordan and Syria would go through the borders to check on their lands, to see their homes, just to see them. And they were shot like pigeons by Israel. How many of them were killed like that? They never counted them. They never counted them. It is estimated by a right-wing racist Israeli historian, Benny Morris, in his book Righteous Victims. He estimates thousands of Palestinians were killed like that. And then the Palestinians established armed groups in the 1960s. And they really made an effort to distinguish between civilians and non-civilians. Of course, mistakes were made, but they never deliberately targeted civilians. As far as I can tell, by the main groups. Having said that, Israel showed far more recklessness in killing civilians on the other side. Somebody counted, for every Israeli civilian killed in the 1970s, Israel managed to kill 100 Palestinians. I'll tell you what, though, the ratio of deaths has been narrowed now, and that upsets the Israelis. They want to keep it 100 to 1. They want to take away all guns from the Palestinians. In the 1980s, a very naive Palestinian Quaker, his name is Mubarak Awad, believed the rhetoric of nonviolence, and he went to Jerusalem and established a center for nonviolence. How did Israel handle this peaceful resistor? How did some of you know, right? They closed down his center and kicked him out of the country. And he's an American citizen. And America never took up his case. So the Palestinians tried that. Hamas resorted to more indiscriminate violence, which I reject, car bombs and the likes. But this is the beauty of the Palestinian people. The Palestinians made it very clear that they do not like these methods. They do not like indiscriminate bombing of civilians, even if they are Israelis. The Palestinians have always maintained higher moral standards in combat, not only of any Arab regime, but certainly of their enemy, which has the lowest moral standards in combat of any regime on earth today, right? Look at the recent war in Gaza. How many Palestinians, civilians were killed? 80% of more than 2,000 Palestinians. And among the Israelis, what's the count? No, it's now like five? Well, they say 6, but I say 5, because they lie. Because, the thing is, Zionist discourse is so frustratingly filled with fabrications and lies. You really have to read it carefully, as I do, to really get into it. For example, when they count the injured, do you know what they count among the injured every time Palestinians shoot one of their firecrackers into Israel? You know what they count? People who were shell-shocked. Shell-shocked. They count them as casualties. They list them as casualties. One person tripped. They count that as casualties, that she was running and stumbled. That's the casualty of Palestinian firecrackers. And then there was an Israeli who was killed on an Israeli military base. The first day he died, he was listed as a soldier. A week later, the New York Times referred to him as a civilian. They said, well, he was a civilian who was giving food to people in the Israeli army in the base. Yeah, I'm sure. Israeli military base allow people to bring food, just bring pizzas, on, all you can eat. And they brought him into the base and he was feeding them. But let's say 5 or 6 versus 2,000. I would say Hamas, and I've never been a fan of Hamas maintained this fight with utmost focus on military targets. And by the way, Hamas would make military communiques saying, we are targeting this area, this military. They never mention that in the Western press. Never mention that in the Western press. When the Israelis say Israelis can kill people in a schoolyard, and they will say, well, we were targeting a mortar that was somewhere, and the American press would print that. They always go out of their way to find excuses for Israeli killing of children. And the killing of children by Israel never stopped since I was born, and before, of course. Look, I'm a Lebanese. I'm from South Lebanon. I am also the story of Israeli terror on Arabs. My grandfather's house, entire South Lebanon, everybody thinks I'm Palestinian, by the way. I can see some of you are surprised. Everywhere I speak on Palestine, people never ask me, are you Palestinian? They ask me, where in Palestine are you from? And I tell them I'm from the city of Tyre. My grandfather's house in the city of Tyre is now condemned. It's the oldest house in the city by far. I'm a part inheritance of that house. That house is condemned because 3 times it was bombed in the 60s, 70s, and 80s by Israel, and the 90s by Israel. This was a family home. That's where my grandmother lived, my aunts lived, and my nephews lived. My cousins lived. That's what in that house. In 1982, I'll tell you a personal story to illustrate. In 1982, I was sitting with my mom in our living room in a middle-class neighborhood in West Beirut, residential neighborhood. There were no Palestinian military bases anywhere around us. So Israel started to bomb, as they do. They always bomb in Lebanon since I grew up. So the bombs became nearer. My mom was freaking out. So I started to joke to make her feel better. So I said, well, they hit your barber shop. And then I would say they hit your butcher shop. And then they hit the grocery store. I mean, it was going louder and louder and louder. And suddenly, the most horrific moment of my life happened. None of you, I hope, will ever live through a moment in which you ask yourself, as I did during those seconds, am I alive or am I dead? And not knowing the answer for several seconds. What happened is, people live in apartment buildings over there. Israel hit an apartment building. They did the same in Gaza. They hit one with concussion bombs. It exploded, and it basically created vacuum. The entire building collapses on itself. It was during the day. Most of the people were women, children, and a disabled man in a wheelchair were killed. Our house was next door. What happened to our house is this. From one end of the house to the other, a thick ray of dust and fire traveled from one end to the other, fast, like visual effects of science fiction movies. And as it did through that, it destroyed all the glass in the house. I saw my mom collapsing on the floor, and that's when I started to think, am I alive or am I dead? Am I alive or am I dead? It went on. I'm sure it was brief, but it felt like such a long time until I realized I was alive. I mean, and somebody is going to tell me that Israel does not practice terrorism. Look at the origins. Name any method of terrorism in the Middle East today. All were introduced by Israel in the 1930s and 40s. Bombs on cafes in Jaffa and Haifa in the 1930s. Bombs on buses, Zionist gangs in the 1930s, 35, 36. Bombing ambulances, Israel. Car bombs, Israel in 1940s, the Camp David Hotel. This one is famous because the victims were white and European. So you heard about that one. Letter bombs to embassies. Israelis did that against the British embassies in Europe in the 1940s. Any method you will think of. I mean, they used to come to Jaffa Market and toss grenades, just as Arabs, like that. They want to drive them away. These are the pioneers of terrorism. And this is why I tell American audiences, and this is why I do not have any deal with Israelis if they serve in the Israeli army unless they renounce Zionism and support Palestinian struggle. These are my conditions personally. Is that in the same way I refuse that we negotiate with bin Laden or ISIS. We should never have anything to do with these terrorists. But similarly, we should never have anything to do with the ideological inspiration for those groups. And that's the state of Israel. The same standard we hold against bin Laden, we should hold against the state of Israel. He's pointing out that there are some interesting, promising changes and shifts in public opinion in a direction that's more critical of Israel, and that the trend are not represented by Elizabeth Warren or Harry Reid. Harry Reid is a progressive? I mean, I never heard that before. I mean, you must have meant somebody else. I mean, that guy is a reaction all his life. I don't share your optimism at all. No, I don't see their shift. Look, judge by the people they are electing to Congress, and judge by their statement, and judge by public opinion. The American public in the war on Gaza has been, unlike European public, how to put it, insensitive, deeply insensitive. They watch the slaughter of Palestinians, 600 children being killed, and they did not feel sympathy, overwhelmingly, did not feel sympathy with the victims. They were sympathetic to the killers. That gives me tremendous feelings of distress and lack of optimism. Having said that, lest I leave you with a moment of despair in any way, that doesn't in any way give me despair, because I was talking to Snehal earlier. I mean, I never believed that this conflict is going to be settled, with all due respect, on American college campuses or in Washington, D.C. Fortunately for the Palestinian, this conflict will be settled over there. What you can do to help, to publicize, to highlight, to cheer and push and lobby is great. But the conflict is going to be settled, the outcome will be produced over there. And it's going to be to the liking of those of us who fight for Palestinian justice. I was asked that since I do not like Hamas, I'm critical of the PLO and so on, where do I see Palestinian resistance coming from? Where did it come from in Gaza? Look at Gaza. I mean, the thing that was not translated in the American press is that the multiplicity of resistance groups in Gaza during this war. It wasn't only Hamas. There was Hamas, there was Islamic Jihad, there were some Fatah people who broke with Mahmoud Abbas and fought heroically in Gaza. There was PFLP, they were extremely active, by the way. And here's another element. The Iranian regime now supplies weapons and money to the Marxist-Leninist organization called the PFLP. And they fought really effectively during this war. But you never hear about them. Why? Because Israel and Zionists want to reduce it all. It's all Hamas. And Hamas is ISIS. Story, end of story. Also, I mean, there are groups that were involved in Gaza you never heard of. How many of you knew that there was a group, a militia fighting against Israel that were formed by Syrian Social National Party members? SSNP. How many of you knew that? Yeah, they were involved in the fight as well. DFLP contingent, they were present as well. So it's going to sprout from among the Palestinian people, and they can change the groups. Fatah can change as it has changed. So that keeps him optimistic. And most importantly, the chronology of Palestinian struggle. Every time Israel puts down a movement, another one more awesome, more formidable comes out. Israel came to Lebanon to extinguish Palestinian military presence. What came out? Hezbollah. And now they feel like, we wish we go back to the PLO days. I was asked two questions. The first one I would be pleasure to answer. About the local restaurant, if that's the right name, for a place called Kismet, which offers ostensible Middle Eastern food. The second question is about the Saudi-Israeli alliance. On the first question, please let me elaborate. My host yesterday suggested that maybe I can grab a bite from Kismet. So after I went to my room, I walked to Kismet, and they had pictures of their dishes. So there is no deception in advertisement. I'm a vegetarian, so I see a vegetarian sample dish. It has dolma, it has grilled vegetables, it has tabbouleh, and it has hummus. First of all, let me go to the easy part. Netanyahu and Zionists can make better hummus than that place. I mean, how easy is that? And you know, Zionist hummus is not like hummus like the way we make it. Olive oil, as I said earlier on my blog, is like crude oil, not like olive oil the way we... And grilled vegetables, I don't know how you define grilled vegetables. I saw him plucking the cauliflower from the deep fryer. So as he gave me back my plate, I said, I saw you, how did you make those cauliflower? He said, we fried them, of course. I said, but here it says that you grilled them. He said, no, we fried them. I said, but why do you have a false advertisement? He said, I don't know, I just work here. That was the answer. The tabbouleh was dry. Nothing was impressive at all. Having said that, today my friend Ziad took me to a restaurant which I've been to. Last time I was in Austin maybe 7 years ago, something like that. And it's called Dimasi. And they have all-you-can-eat Arabic food. And the quality is really excellent, comparable to one of my favorite restaurants in America called Fadi down in Houston, and comparable to Middle Eastern restaurant in Dearborn or in Anaheim, California. So that answered the first question. So maybe BDS should include Kismet on the list. Not on political, on culinary grounds. On the second question, Saudi-Israeli alliance, it is not secret anymore. After September 11, Saudis got in deep trouble because of their connection to the hijackers. There are a lot of articles being written about. There's an article about the 28 pages that are missing from the September 11 report, which the American government suppressed, the Bush and the Obama government suppressed to protect the Saudi government. And Lawrence Wright, the journalist, wrote about that in a long article in the New Yorker. The Saudis, to preempt any question about their role, they decided to get to the heart of Washington. And they calculate the best way to do that by making an alliance with Israel. And they share, I mean, recently I read that Tzivi Livni said that Saudi Arabia and Israel share many common, and Netanyahu said the same, many values together. And I agree with that. They share the values of repression, of exclusivism, of religious intolerance, of denial of freedom of speech. They indeed do. And of course, they also share an enmity to progressive voices and movements throughout the Middle East region, and they have collaborated together in the past, like in the war of Yemen in the 1960s. Don't forget that. I mean, the war against the Marxist rebels in Oman, the war against the Palestinian resistance in Jordan. On all these issues in the past, Saudi Arabia and Israel collaborated. But their alliance now is more multifaceted. You see, what was the beef of Saudi Arabia, or tofu if you're a vegetarian? What was the beef of Saudi Arabia with Israel in the last several decades in Washington, D.C.? They used to disagree because Israel used to block arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Now Israel doesn't. They know that those weapons will never be used against Israel. And they know the Americans control them anyway. And they give them to Israel, to Saudi Arabia, stripped of their most advanced tools and technology. So it is one of the most, somebody asked me about the trends. The Saudi-Israeli alliance, to me, is the deadliest trend in the Middle East today, and it is the spear of the counter-revolution of the Arab world. Thank you all for coming and listening. Get out of here.